Kia ora koutou katoa. Good afternoon. Today I am here with our Minister of Defence, Penny Henare, announcing that New Zealand will be making a significant contribution to the global effort to support Ukraine against Russia's invasion. The needs of Ukraine remain broad, urgent, and are changing rapidly. The global response to this violent breach of international law will not stop until Russia stops. And as such, countries around the world have pledged an unprecedented amount of military support, particularly with the emerging evidence of war crimes and the mounting civilian death toll. The enormous quantities of military support that countries are contributing has made distribution difficult, and there is now a growing need for transportation, logistical support, and people power to deliver to Ukraine's military and citizens what is so urgently needed. This is a problem that needs to be resolved quickly, and New Zealand has been asked to respond alongside our partners. Today I'm announcing that New Zealand will deploy to Europe a New Zealand Defence Force C-130 Hercules aircraft supported by a team of 50 Defence Force personnel to assist with the transportation and distribution of donated military aid to Ukraine. An international donor coordination centre has been set up in Germany to coordinate the flow of military aid to Ukraine. Over the next 2 months, our C-130 will join a chain of military aircraft from partner nations, travelling throughout Europe carrying much-needed equipment and supplies to key distribution centres. But at no point will they enter Ukraine, nor have they been asked to. The C-130 will depart for Europe on Wednesday. Additionally, the New Zealand Defence Force will deploy an 8-person team of logistics specialists based in Germany and travelling around Europe to help coordinate the flow of aid and supplies to Ukraine. They will work alongside close partners across Europe for the next 3 months to keep these essential items moving through the military logistics networks. This deployment is in addition to the 9 intelligence personnel who are already in the United Kingdom and Belgium, supporting our partners in intelligence and engagement work. Further to this deployment, Cabinet has decided today that New Zealand will contribute an extra $13 million towards military, legal and human rights support, including $7.5 million to contribute to weapons and ammunition procurement via the United Kingdom. This will allow the UK as a trusted partner to procure the right weapons and ammunition for the armed forces of Ukraine. It ensures they have what they need when they need it, given the constantly shifting nature of this war. It also directly responds to a request from Ukraine for us to coordinate our support with the United Kingdom. $4.1 million to support commercial satellite access for the Ukrainian Defence Intelligence. This will provide near real-time updates to Ukrainian officials to help them understand and respond to Russia's actions on the battlefield. $1 million to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to support the ongoing monitoring of and accountability for human rights violations being perpetrated by Russia. $500,000 for the International Court of Justice and International Criminal Court to support the case against Russia in relation to the situation in Ukraine. This is in addition to the $315,000 we committed last month and sits alongside our call as one of 41 states that a case be heard by the International Criminal Court. This contribution is not one the government has taken lightly. Each contribution we have made to date has been based on the question, in a war that New Zealand stands so strongly against, what is the most meaningful contribution we can make? While today's announcement includes procurement that will directly support the Ukraine Army, so too did our existing contribution of intelligence analysts and protective equipment for the Army. Our aid in all its forms is to assist the Ukraine Army to repel a brutal Russian invasion. Peace in the region of Europe is essential for global stability. New Zealand is not immune to its impacts, so we do need to make sure we play our role in its resolution. Ultimately, New Zealand will keep looking at the ways we can make the greatest difference, which is in the skills we can send, the logistics we can provide, and intelligence. Our support to date has been comprehensive and covers every aspect of this conflict: humanitarian, legal, military, transportation, and people. and is in addition to the economic and trade sanctions we put in place to help grind the Russian economy to a halt as a way to end this war. We will continue to answer the calls of Ukraine with regular reviews of how we can keep making the greatest difference from here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'll now hand over to Minister Hinare, and of course the Chief of Defence is also here to answer questions you may have. Minister Hinare.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Prime Minister. Today's announcements are a substantial contribution to the efforts of the international community in responding to Russia's unprovoked, illegal and unjustified invasion of Ukraine. The decision to deploy a C-130 Hercules aircraft with a dedicated team of 50 personnel, as well as 8 logistics specialists, is a very significant one. These deployments will provide a real contribution to Ukraine's defence and are complementary to the efforts of our international partners. The Hercules will be based in Europe and will transport donated military aid destined for Ukraine via third country locations in Europe. Our people will be working alongside the armed forces of other countries. This deployment is in addition to the already pledged support announced over the past few weeks. Just to recap, so far, we have authorised the deployment of 9 NZDF personnel to Europe to support our partners in intelligence work over the next 3 months, provided surplus tactical NZDF equipment, contributed $5 million to the NATO Trust Fund, which provides fuel, military rations, communications and military first aid kits to support Ukraine. We are actively listening to Ukraine and our partners about how we can best support the people of Ukraine. As the Prime Minister has already outlined, New Zealand has moved at pace to provide significant support as the situation continues to evolve. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Minister Hinare. We're now happy to take questions.
Prime Minister, is this enough of a contribution for New Zealand to make?
This is a significant contribution for us to make from the other side of the world, recognising that our people can make a difference. 50 people are travelling with our C-130 to make a tangible impact on this conflict by ensuring they have the logistical support they need, and that sits alongside a further contribution of military aid.
How does that compare to Australia's contribution? They've sent in the Bushmasters, they've sent things like coal, a much bigger financial contribution. How do you think we stack up to them?
At this point, New Zealand has contributed $30 million worth of aid and support across humanitarian aid and military support. And alongside that, we have a total of 67 people. Look, this is a conflict at great distance to New Zealand, but still of significance to New Zealand. What is happening in Ukraine has an impact on the entire world. It is a threat to the sovereignty of a nation, and that's why we are playing our part in a significant way.
How does this sit with you sending troops off to Europe?
This sits squarely with New Zealand's values. Here we have a clear breach of the international rules-based order. We have a country's territorial sovereignty being challenged. We have a war which everyone can see. There is evidence around war crimes and impact on civilians. This is New Zealand playing our part, and it's a significant part. 58 people today, in addition to those we've already sent, and the C-130 to help distribute critical military and humanitarian aid. So I'll give Minister Hinare the chance to just speak to the significance of the contribution, and then I'll come to Gina.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and that's correct. In my engagements with the UK and partners worldwide, it has been noted New Zealand's contribution in many forums, and we're proud of the contribution that we've made to date. Secretary Wallace made it very clear that despite New Zealand being at the bottom end of the world from the conflict, he noted our contribution in line with our partners, namely Australia and the US.
You've up until now shied away from funding lethal aid. What changed your mind? Why are we now funding weapons?
I think you'll find what we've always questioned is the almost arbitrary distinction that's being made between, for instance, the intelligence analysts that we have sent, which will be directly contributing to the war effort in Ukraine. What we've always tried to ask ourselves, though, is what is the most meaningful thing that New Zealand can do and how can we do it? When the ask came for logistical support, people, the C-130, that was a good fit with what we could make sure we were able to deploy quickly and we know will make a difference. And we've done that alongside an additional tranche of aid, alongside what we've already committed.
Can you maybe put into context how big this deployment is? Have we sent this many people into Europe?
Yeah, in the 1990s, but I'll have the CDF just traverse some of those past contributions.
In the past, for instance, Bosnia, from 92 to about 96, we had around 250 people on the ground, plus armoured vehicles in support of peacekeeping. That's the largest in more recent times.
There have been many calls for us to send in the Javelin missiles. Can you put into context how long, I guess, those would last? We don't have that many of them.
It would last a very short period of time. What we've been told is that it's actually better to go through UK or the NATO coordination centres to actually provide military aid in the terms of weaponry. It will get there quicker, it will be used and compatible with the Ukraine forces.
About 5 minutes was the time that we
Yes.
possibly, CDF?
Yes.
About 5 minutes of contribution to the war versus a deployment of 2 to 3 months for our people and the C-130. Just gives a bit of context. Other questions?
Sorry, just to be clear,
Yeah.
this is New Zealand's largest defence force in 26 years.
Into Europe. Yep, CDF, that's where you...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Specifically talking about Europe.
And Ben, perhaps I'm not aware of the personnel contribution made by Australia, so I couldn't give you that comparison. There's been at no point any suggestion that New Zealand's contribution does anything other than stack up and is considered particularly meaningful from the engagements that I've had with our Ukrainian counterparts. In fact, Minister Jacinda, you were recently on a call where New Zealand was used as an example of the contributions being made.
Prime Minister, would you
Yes,
describe
sorry,
this
Barry.
as something of an ideological shift for Labor? Because normally, buying weaponry is not something that is in Labor's book.
No, I wouldn't. And in fact, you will have seen all of last week. The point that I was making was New Zealand's contribution was already to the war effort. And it was taken in at that time, those areas where the greatest need was, and the most meaningful contribution that New Zealand can make. We've continued to assess that as those requests have come in, and they've often changed, and as those requests have changed, we've reassessed. This is the latest iteration. You know, the reason that this stands with New Zealand's values and our independent foreign policy is because what we are seeing here is the most blatant breach of a country's sovereignty. And you've seen that in how quickly the world has come in behind to support Ukraine. And the significant shift you've seen, for instance, in some countries within Europe and the way that they've responded. And all of that speaks to the fact that an act like this impacts on every democracy in every country that considers its sovereignty sacred.
Why did you make the distinction earlier on about funding non-lethal aid versus lethal aid?
And
You
again,
did make that distinction earlier.
yeah, and look, again, this was all about where was the most meaningful impact that we could make at that time, where those asks were. The Ukrainian ask at that time was also quite focused on what we actually sent: protective equipment, body armour, and so on. We have constantly assessed the asks that we've had and said, how can New Zealand respond to that quickly and in a meaningful way? Sometimes simply the transportation of some of the goods that might have been requested simply rendered it not a helpful contribution from us.
We've been begging for weapons for quite a long time.
And some weapons which New Zealand simply does not have.
We're now funding them through the UK.
Yes, and they've asked us specifically at this point, they've said that that would be a reasonable way to make that contribution, but they've also asked for support through logistics, and that's what we're doing as well.
How will the Hercules, this might be a question for the CDF, how will the Hercules cope on the flight? I mean, they can have a lot of trouble. Are you taking a spare engine, for instance? How many of the staff will be maintaining the plane? How long will it take to get there?
Certainly, look, the aircraft is deploying with what we call a deployment pack-up and maintenance people. For instance, it will have around 20 maintenance people go with the aircraft. It will be full of the 50 people plus a pack-up to self-operate at wherever they get based.
And how long will it take to get to Europe? You know?
By the time they deploy on Wednesday and then set up, the earliest they could be tasked would be, I'd say, Monday next week.
We gave an advance heads up via ministers that we believe that this would be a decision that we would finalise today at Cabinet so that they could begin preparation, which is why they're able to deploy so quickly on Wednesday.
You mentioned 8 logistical staff. Is that separate from the 50? I'm a bit confused.
Yes, it is. We've got an air load team which stays with the aircraft, loading and unloading. These are supply officers that will operate wherever the need is, so they're separate from the aircraft.
So
And the
really,
aircraft tasking.
question for Minister Henare, e
Yeah,
te
go
minita, kua kore pēr ki te tētahi kaupapa āwhina pēnei te nui, ka mātua i tēnei I hihia rānei koe ki te kia nui ake te tono atu I ētahi atu mea tautoko?
Koina te mahi nui kei moi te aroaro o te kāwanatanga I tēnei wātonu. Kia tirohia I ngā tono te ao whānui ki ngā take kei roto I te pakanga I tēnei wātonu. Koino ko tā mātou kia aro hai ki ia tono me tā mātou pānga ki te whakatutuki I taua tono ki te kore. E hoa, hore kau he take kia tukuna ētahi atu mea mo te kore noiho.
Kia tā te kāwanatanga tuku atu I tēnei ringa āwhina ki Uropi. Engari, ka ua pēr ka kite I ēnei momo āwhina ki ngā pakanga iwi take o te ao. Hea hai?
Tā te mea ko te pakanga I tēnei wātonu ki Ruhia, he mea ka tino pākau atu ki te ao whānui. E hake I te mea ki tētahi whenua anake, ki tētahi iwi anake, kua rongo tātou I te ngau o ngā take ka puta mai I tēnei pakanga ki roto o Ruhia, ko ngā take penehini, ko ngā take ohanga. Nō reira koina pēr te take nui kei mua I tō mātou aroaro I tēnei wātonu. Atu I tēnā, kei te tiro haere tonu mātou, hia ngā pakanga huri noa I te ao, me tā mātou mahi ki roto I aua pakanga.
Yeah, Mikey, and then...
Do you expect what do you expect Russia's response to be towards this move? I mean, we're obviously taking it up a level. Do you expect them to take great offence to this?
Look, my expectation is that this contribution will be seen in a similar way to our previous contribution. Keeping in mind this is in addition to the $11 million New Zealand has already contributed, including to the NATO Trust Fund, which is directly supporting Ukraine's military as well. So I expect that it will be seen as an ongoing contribution by New Zealand. We already have, of course, been added to the list of leaders and members of parliament and others who are subject to a travel ban, and that is broadly in line with the kind of response that we would have expected from Russia.
On the issue of the Russian ambassador and the Select Committee investigating if it can summons him for questioning, does the Select Committee risk overstepping in terms of New Zealand's relationship with the ambassador?
Well, obviously, MFAT and the government has suspended already some of those diplomatic consultations as part of our response. And the ambassador has been asked to come in by MFAT on several occasions. So obviously New Zealand's position is very clear with the ambassador. When it comes to the decision by the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, obviously that is something that is still live for the committee. I imagine that they will be seeking legal advice over the legality of bringing in someone who essentially has diplomatic immunity. So my intent is simply to let the committee go through its own processes. The most important point probably for me to make is, this is not the thing that is going to make the most tangible difference to those who are subject to this war, and that is the focus that we have as a government.
Are you comfortable with the Select Committee investigating it as an option, considering it could be in breach of the...
Again, I trust that they'll hear the legal advice and respond to that accordingly. I understand that that's a process they're still underway with. But again, in terms of what's going to make a difference to the people of Ukraine, it is much less likely to be those engagements with diplomats and more likely to be economic sanctions, the pressure on the Russian economy and the contribution to the war effort.
Prime Minister, what do you say to, we know that people from some foreign countries have joined the Ukrainian fight. What do you say to New Zealanders who might feel strongly about this and want to join the Ukrainians and fight for them?
Again, feel confident that on your behalf, the government is making a significant and meaningful contribution, that we are sending our best people to support the efforts, and that we still continue to have a do not travel warning. Our focus is on getting and supporting the family members of those Ukrainian who are here to come here to be safe rather than sending people in.
If a New Zealand citizen did happen to go to Ukraine and participate in this war, they would not be prosecuted by New Zealand authorities?
No, it is a travel advisory, and again though, we cannot provide consular support in a war zone. And that's one of the reasons we give that advice so strongly, that should anything happen to a New Zealand citizen, our preference is always to be able to support them, but this is not an environment where we can do that. I'll come to Justin, then I'll come back over to Gina.
Did Cabinet consider sending LAVs, and is that an option?
Yeah, I'll let for the LAVs, I'll come to the Minister.
No, and due to ongoing discussions relevant to the LAVs, I won't divulge too much more information on that, but I will say, however, in consideration, we looked at how tenable it was to send LAVs, and I have it on the advice of CDF and the Defence Force that simply transporting, training, managing, repairing and servicing LAVs in theatre is exceptionally hard and exceptionally expensive. So I think the decision that was made today to directly fund our efforts through UK and NATO is the best way forward.
Yeah, and this is where just because you have something doesn't actually mean it's the best contribution that you can make. I don't know if the CDF was talking a little bit about the interoperability issues with the LAV relative to what Ukraine has been asking for.
I think you probably need to look at the training time we give our own people to operate a complex machine, which the LAV is, and just getting them there. We would have to call on other nations or ship them there, and we know how long that takes.
Yeah. Australian commitment, though, to sending similar vehicles run into the same issues?
The Bushmaster?
Yeah, the Bushmaster is for moving and protecting individuals, whereas the LAV is a fighting vehicle. It's quite a different role that they play.
Look, I'll just, if you don't mind, I might just canvass the other questions that are relevant to the Minister and the CDF, and then we can go to other issues of the day.
I have one of those too.
Yep, sure, go ahead.
Are you completely and utterly ruling out New Zealand troops crossing the border into Ukraine?
That is not the contribution that nations are making at this point, and that is not the contribution New Zealand is making or proposing.
Just on the Ukraine issue, what was the thinking around the Hercules not flying into Ukraine?
It has not been asked to, yeah. But perhaps then that comes down to the tasking for the C-130, where, as I understand, very much making sure that it's part of a network travelling around Europe, picking up those contributions and making sure that they're ready to deploy then at the border.
That's correct. The role of our aircraft is actually to move equipment which has been either donated or bought around the region, and it will be transported into country, usually by road. There are, as far as I understand, very few aircraft that are actually flying in and out, transporting military or other equipment.
If Ukraine asked for us to fly in, we would?
That's not something that we've been asked to do. That would be something considered separately. But again, at this point, it's all at the border, and that's where our people will be in the surrounding area.
And just on the $7.5 million to go to the UK for weapons, can you say what sort of weapons you expect them to buy?
So it will be based, so the UK is working closely with Ukraine and their defence counterparts in Ukraine to make sure that that procurement is going to exactly what is needed and asked for. So the CDF can provide what we're hearing that some of the latest asks have been.
It is very useful for Ukraine to find almost one point of supply, and what they are saying is the type of weapons. They're then going to donor nations to see if they have them, and at the moment they're actually going to manufacturers as well. So it's an easy way to support Ukraine, giving them exactly what they want.
So the UK's been supplying missiles mostly. Is that what you'd expect the money to go for?
It's a complete range. They actually have, if you like, an open book saying you tell us what you want, from non-lethal aid to lethal aid, and the range of what they want at the time. And they have the supply chain to actually make those orders. What we will do with our aircraft is provide a means of transporting them to the various parts around Ukraine, outside of Ukraine, to where they're needed.
But you haven't prescribed, it can't be lethal?
No, we've given no set prescription. You remember with the NATO Trust Fund, that was quite specifically focused on military needs that cut across for instance, fuel, military supplies and provisions, even healthcare needs, military hospitals and so on. That's where the NATO Trust Fund was focused, and that's where we put an initial cut because that was an ask from Ukraine at that time. The UK, over this period of time, has been working even more closely, and we've seen that they've become a very direct liaison with Ukraine, and so that's an obvious place for us to then look to expand our support.
How is the defence of Ukraine actually going, according to your intelligence?
That is definitely a question for these two, between them.
I think, as you can see in open sources, that Ukraine has defended their country very well. They've been able to do that with the supply of both ammunition and systems, and also intelligence to allow them to actually operate effectively. They have the morale, they have the will, and they're fighting for their country. And we're seeing Russia having to change its tactics and reconstitute to actually stay within the fight.
Prime Minister, how much of this role of the UK being a liaison is a result of Prime Minister Johnson's recent visit, and will you visit Kiev, if so, when?
Not at any time in the near future. Again, you know, this very much for us is about making sure that we have the intelligence and information we need to provide a useful contribution on New Zealand's behalf. And so we've made sure that we've done that in as light a touch way as possible because, of course, as you can imagine, the calls on the leadership within Ukraine are plentiful. And this is an extraordinary time where they'll need to, of course, be utterly focused on their people and the conflict. So this is a way that we can make sure that we have that real-time understanding. We have close proximity to what Ukraine needs, but we're doing it via a trusted partner who is very closely engaged. Again, Minister Hinare, you might wish to comment on some of the discussions you've had with your UK counterpart.
Correct. The UK Secretary Wallace has been very clear with us about our contribution and how well received it is in the first instance. But secondly, also how interoperable our Defence Force personnel are in their systems, which is why I think the current decision to send up the personnel that we've described today will be fitting in the leadership that the UK is providing. And I want to be clear, the UK have provided this leadership from the outset. And I've, like I said, spoken with Secretary Wallace and a number of others to make sure that we're in step.
Everyone wants this war to be over, and the conversation I had with the Prime Minister of Ukraine was the chance for us to visit one another's respective countries when that time came.
Prime Minister,
are we everything? Is that everything on Ukraine? Yep. Okay. Thank you both.
Prime Minister,
Gina,
can I ask you about...
Sorry, I did delay one of Gina's questions, and then I'll come straight to you, Barry.
Lewis Wall says some of the atrocities in Ukraine are occurring in China. Do you agree?
Look, the situation that we have in Ukraine right now is an immediate invasion of a sovereign territory. So the whole world can see the situation that Ukraine is in right now is unique, which is why the global response is unique.
We've been told that Lewis is rude, abusive, and not a team player. Is that why you wanted her out?
I've focused in all of my discussions in this period post-Louisa announcing her resignation on the contribution that she has made, which has been significant. And I continue alongside all of my colleagues to wish her well in what I know will be an ongoing contribution to equality and human rights in our region.
If she has made such a significant contribution, why did you tell her that there's no place in your cabinet for her?
Of course, from time to time, as you'd expect, from any number of my colleagues, I'll be asked on feedback as members of our team and about future prospects. And whenever that occurs, I'll always sit down, respond and give time to one of our team members. But what I won't then do is reflect in a public capacity what that conversation entailed. And I think you can understand why I would offer that privacy to all of my colleagues. Also, as I said this morning, we have a significant number of exceptionally talented individuals in our caucus. Only a few are able to be a member of Cabinet, and there will obviously from time to time be those who may be disappointed. That doesn't lessen the contribution Louisa made.
Has the government just given her a plum job to help her out the door?
Oh, you can see from the list of achievements that Louisa has that she does have a particular focus in these areas in an area of expertise. She has achieved much in her time in office, and that's been well canvassed. And the area that she's moving into aligns with the area that she has already demonstrated a passion and expertise.
The job was
Yeah,
given
Mikey.
to her,
What
though,
does
right?
it say about the Labour Party leadership if it cannot seem to manage, at least in Cabinet, an MP who clearly has work ethic, experience and a record of delivery and yet isn't promoted? What does that say about your ability to manage spirited, if you like, MPs?
All that says is that we have, a large group of talented individuals, larger than we have spaces for in our cabinet, and that is all.
In terms of experience and delivery?
It has always been the case that we have, amongst the 120 MPs in Parliament, which is a small proportion, of course, of the exceptional individuals who serve their communities. A small proportion make it to Parliament, an even smaller proportion make it through to Cabinet. There will be those who, of course, have that desire, but again, Larissa is an example of someone who has an incredible record, regardless of having done it as a Member of Parliament rather than a Cabinet Minister.
Is there any truth to her assertion that...
Henry,
Is there any truth...
I'll canvass around if you don't mind.
Is there any truth to her assertion that...
I'll let Jenna finish.
Is there any truth to her assertion that the reason that you held a grudge against her was because she backed David Cunliffe?
Absolutely not, because of course you'll see by the fact that our current cabinet is made up of a range of caucus members who have been supporters of different leaders, and that has never ever weighed into any of my decision making. But again, actually, I would rather focus on what Larissa achieved while we're here rather than getting into some of those things I consider consigned to the history books.
So is it your view that Larissa had lost the support of her LEC in Manurewa?
I don't feel well positioned to talk about some of the individual things that happen in an electorate level of any individual MP's electorate. They know their areas best. But one thing I just have pointed to is that the decision-making processes in the Labour Party means that local MPs and candidates are selected by the local Labour Party. List MPs and their ranking are then selected by a cross-section of the party's executive, as it were, so a specific moderating committee. So those are not decisions made by single leaders, never has been.
Challenged on for the selection already prior to...
Sorry, what was that?
She'd been challenged by already prior to Ardern Williams kind of entering the contest and all of that going down. Was it your view or your understanding, based on conversations with the New Zealand Council and other people in the electorate, that challenge was likely to be successful anyway? Thus why you would, allow Ardern Williams to come in late?
Look, I actually don't know that anything is added to where we are currently by traversing things that happened over a year and a bit ago. Ultimately, as you can see though by the facts, there was a different candidate selected in Lewis's seat. She, however, still did have a strong list position and now moves on to a role where I think she'll make a real contribution. And so I would rather reflect on what was achieved in that period, rather some of the intricacies of party politics.
Will you be attending a valedictory speech?
Oh, I'm not in the House on Thursdays, and that is just the pattern of my movements around the country rather than anything else. Joe? No, I'm...
It's been 16 months since the Crown purchased land at Ihumatao. I'm just wondering if you are frustrated by the fact that the governance group still hasn't been set up and that it's hoped at this stage it might be the end of May, but even then there's no promises.
What we want in Ihumatao is an enduring solution. I think everyone understands that it's an area where there are really strong views and aspirations for the future of the land there. I'm confident that with a group that is considered to be representative working together, that we will actually be able to find solutions that meet all of those aspirations, be it recognising the historical and cultural significance, but also the housing aspirations of the people there.
How long it's taking to get the representatives to agree to the process and to be appointed? Are you concerned then at how they will manage to come to any conclusions about what sort of housing they're going to be applying or whatever type of housing they actually are going to be able to put there?
No, I think in some ways there's an understanding that in some ways the establishment can be the hardest part. And once then you're able to start having those conversations, I think we'll find that there's significant agreement across the group, and that's when we'll be able to start making progress.
Also just ask,
Finish there, Joe, and then I'll come back over to those who haven't got a question.
with Willie Jackson obviously being away sick, was there an opportunity at Cabinet today to discuss any further developments with the United Nations Declaration?
Look, I'll let him give that update when he's able. The one thing, just to put in context what it is that is going through a process at the moment, it's simply the report back on the targeted engagement that's already occurred, and then to talk about the next steps for the drafting of a declaration, the process for drafting the declaration plan. So that's broadly on track. That was, as you can see on the website where we've set out the timelines for everything, that was meant to happen in March, so broadly is what we were expecting, and then you can see from there you've got the drafting, then you've got public consultation and so on. So it's not the most significant milestone in this whole process.
My understanding from Minister Jackson was that he was seeking today for permission to get drafting, and that he hoped that would only take a couple of months. So did Cabinet sign that off?
Again, I'll just leave the Minister, as is our custom, we'll leave Ministers to make announcements when they are ready. Yep, I'll come over here, and then I'm going to take just perhaps maybe one more.
Just on COVID settings.
Yeah.
Will you change the orange settings so that school kids need to wear masks, as Michael Baker has suggested?
Yeah, so I think a really important point to make. In orange, currently the guidance allows the flexibilities for schools themselves to determine whether or not as a community they wish to continue to use masks. So what we've gone back and asked the Ministry of Health is to look again at providing as much guidance as we can to schools in order to support them to make those decisions. It is definitely not the case that we're advising people not to wear masks in orange in schools. There are good grounds to continue to do so, but this does allow schools to make those decisions based on their experience with COVID to date and the needs of their school community. Okay, and then I'll finish, Mark. I don't think you've had one.
At the IPCC negotiations, New Zealand officials argued that the term plant-based foods should not appear in the report summary. Is that something you're aware of?
No, that is, if that is the case, and I would want to go and check that, that is not something that I can certainly tell you that Cabinet has taken a view on. All right, thank you, everyone.